My name is Jacquelyn Litt. I am the Dean of Douglas Residential College, which is the women's college here at Rutgers, New Brunswick. And obviously, these are concerns that we have representing our 2,000 women and Rutgers women in general. There's data actually from UCLA that finds that women undergraduates have tremendously high levels of concern about their bodies and very high levels of physical unwellness, that they respond generally to stress and responsibility and negative interactions with a deep, profound sense that they are not healthy. So I think that weight and body clearly is implicated in the everyday lives of my students, and I know for many of us. I think the conversation that we just had is really interesting, and our panel will engage some of the questions and add to this frustratingly complex issue. I want to just add something from my background, which in part I've studied poverty for many years, and also the medicalization of women's bodies. And there's something profoundly moral about discussions of health. I don't believe that these are can ever strictly be purely scientific discussions. There's a moral subtext. And that's talking about thin and fat and big and food and eating and cooking. These are deeply moral issues in a very highly medicalized society. There's right ways to do things and wrong ways. And I just want to put that out there as a historical and social construction. That's not to say there are unhealthy things, but that will empirically, we know, hurt us. But I think this is a very complex issue because it's just not so clear-cut about the science. The science itself is socially produced, I believe, but certainly the topics we're talking about are laden with social meaning. So I want to just throw that out there as part of as we think about this. I'm looking at Debbie Carr, as a sociologist who gets this completely. Okay, so we have a great panel, very interdisciplinary, that will really lend some new knowledge about these topics. I want to begin by introducing Sabrina Strings. She's a postdoctoral fellow in the School of Public Health and the Department of Sociology at UC Berkeley, where she examines how social and environmental factors contribute to racial and gender disparities in rates of chronic illness. She has a BA with high honors in psychology from UC Berkeley and a PhD from UC San Diego. Her research examines how the intersecting structures of race, class, and sexuality are inscribed on the body, which is then marshaled to validate social inequality. Her book manuscript, Thin, White, and Saved, Fat, Stigma, and the Fear of the Big Black Body, explores how body size in particular has been used to maintain social hierarchies in the United States. Strings' articles and essays have recently been featured in Feminist Media Studies, The Feminist Wire, and Truth Out, independent news media. Welcome, Sabrina.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Jacqueline, for that introduction. So today, we're going to talk about an often unexamined element of the thin ideal, which is its racialization. The title of my talk is Fear of the Big Black Body, the History of Fat, Fright, and the Thin Ideal. So, frequently when we think of the slender aesthetic, we're drawn to the contemporary moment. We're generally given images, much like the one depicted here, of women who are tall and slender. In fact, there have been a number of second-wave feminists, people such as Kim Chernin, Naomi Watts, and Susan Bordeaux, who have talked about this ideal as oppressive and even, thank you, okay, and even tyrannical. But what has been under-theorized, typically, is the way in which many of the people who represent this trend are typically white, as you see depicted here, and in many cases also blonde. And it's not just this one image. Okay? So news stories have recently talked about the fact that when you look at models who are supposed to be our representatives of the slender ideal, they're often white. We have the New York Times, the Huffington Post, NPR, all discussing the same racialization. So that was something that motivated my interest in this topic. I wanted to know, is the thin ideal white? And what can explain the association that we see between thinness, whiteness, and beauty in the United States, particularly for women? Are these associations relatively new? Or do they have a much longer historical trajectory than we previously believed? And finally, how does this relate to our current concerns surrounding obesity? So in my book manuscript, what I'm doing is I'm doing an analysis of a variety of different materials. I'm looking at scientific materials, medical documents, philosophical literature, as well as art over the course of several centuries. But today we're really going to focus just on scientific literature and also medical literature that talks about race. And in my book, I show that thinness has a century-old history of being connected with whiteness in the United States. Simultaneously, fat bodies were degraded and associated with blackness, and with black women in particular. So now, why would the thin ideal be white? Thinking about the evolution of colonial race science. So we found that originally, racial ideas suggested that there were people of different races, very simple, and we can identify them by skin color. But over time, as the colonial enterprise and slavery expanded, there had to be new ways of categorizing people. Skin color wasn't enough. There was too much racial intermixture to be able to say who was white anymore by looking at skin alone. They had to add in things like temperament, behavior, and then also other physical features. Yeah. So by the 19th century, as many of you may be aware, there was the idea that white people were rational and disciplined. Okay? And as rational and disciplined people, they didn't really engage in many of the sensual or oral appetites that we believe as scientists in the 19th century to be base, primitive, and savage. They started to prize as attractive those qualities that were deemed to be evidence of self-control. So again, in the 17th century, we might have seen depictions of beauty amongst Europeans that looked something like this. Women who were robust. This is actually a rendering by Peter Paul Rubens. Many of you are familiar with his work, I'm sure, from 1639 called The Three Graces. And typically, in earlier periods prior to the late 18th century, let's say, you would get images of beauty such as this. Significantly, black women and other women of different racial ethnic groups were not excluded from these very representations of beauty. Right? So here we have a rendering from the 18th century of a king and his quote-unquote favorite Moor. Her name is Moor Frederica. Okay. So these were terms that were actually used at the time and considered acceptable at that time. We also have ideas coming from philosophers and scientists that beauty has to be an intellectual ideal. So they would say things like, I would not have you imagine that would have anything to do with the thick lips, the good people of Bantam, so as far as I was able to find, a place in Indonesia, or the excessively small feet of the ladies of quality in China. Okay. You have to be rational, self-controlled, disciplined. This is what it means to be civilized. In science, we have similar ideas. Now, many of you may not be familiar with Denis Diderot. But you probably are familiar with his contemporaries, people such as Voltaire and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. So this is the circle, intellectual circle, that he was part of. And he actually wrote an encyclopedia that is being rediscovered now in terms of its influence. It's being written about by a lot of different social scientists. And he said, Africans are ugly, very fond of gluttony. Okay? So you see that over time, representations of women who were voluptuous, such as this woman we see here, rendered by Thomas Gainsborough, who was a British artist in the late 18th century, started to fall out. And instead, same artist, later time period, we see women who are more slender. Right? So that this then becomes an important aesthetic ideal for whites. As we approach the 19th century, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the woman depicted here. This is a woman whose name was Saartjie Baartman, but she was known in Europe as the Hottentot Venus. Okay. So the idea of her being a Venus was the sense that, well, Africans prize fat, right? And so she represents the central aesthetic ideal of Africans. In that way, she is a Venus. So typically, historians and scholars have talked about the discourse surrounding her buttocks and her labia. But there was also a great deal of scientific literature written by people such as Cuvier about her body size. Okay? Something about fatness that was deemed black. And because it was also black, it was degraded. This is a rendering of what was called the steel engraving lady, taken from the early 19th century, it's approximately 1830s, in fact, from Godey's Lady's Book, one of the most popular 19th century magazines in the United States, in which you see that the shape is, in fact, very similar. So they're using bustles in order to mimic sort of a larger backside. But the slenderness is noted, right? The size of the body is different. So did the introduction of a new ideal, a new racialized ideal, did it instantly mean that fatness completely fell out of favor and that voluptuous bodies disappeared? Well, no. So they continued to exist, but they were increasingly contested. So that's the important point, that over time, there was the contestation of women who were voluptuous and the question of whether or not they could still be beautiful. So you have here Lillian Russell, who was star of stage and screen in the late 19th century. And in her earlier years, she was prized as beautiful. But by the early 20th century, there was the idea that she was a particularly robust creature. And she was constantly criticized in places like the New York Times for that. Okay. So now we also have an interesting counterpoint, because we get to see a representation of feminine beauty through an iconic image, right, from Gone with the Wind, of Scarlett O'Hara, who was thin and even trying to accentuate her waist further through a corset, and a mammy. So an enduring image of black women throughout the 19th century, right? The idea that they were caregiving and that they were large. So we see this very different idea of femininity being represented here. So now, by the tail end of the 19th century, you get very clear representations of the type of philosophical and scientific ideas that were coming out of the late 18th century, being reproduced in popular literature. Not only just in terms of visual imagery, but also in terms of text. So the idea that fatness is undesirable and that you're not going to be a social success as an obese person, okay, unless you're going to black up, right, burnt cork yourself, and then go to Africa. Now, because I'm running out of time, I'll just quickly point out that there's a very clear similarity between Pinups on a Beach, rendered in 1898, and Pinups on a Beach that I showed you in the beginning, right? So the idea that this is a very old aesthetic ideal indeed. So how does this relate to today? When we think about the obesity epidemic, we think of black women. So they are the subpopulation that is most commonly deemed at risk, high risk, okay? And that there is an implicit valorization of the very ideal that was deemed tyrannical in some of the medical literature. So that the medical literature then starts to reify the thin ideal, right? And so the idea that there's this mixed blessing for African American women because they're more obese, even though, of course, black women, the scientific literature shows, can be healthier at heavier weights than white women, but it's a problem. So we need to weigh the stigma against the desire to control obesity. Yeah. So what can we do? Well, since we know that there are different racial ethnic cutoffs for healthy weights, we can actually move away from BMI altogether. This is actually not getting us very far. We can focus less on fat and more on the comorbid diseases, on diabetes, on coronary heart disease. And we can address them by employing interventions that address structural inequalities. So as some of you might have even pointed out in your questions and comments, that there's a problem in the access to healthy behaviors. And that these are the things that we can actually work on, providing foods that are healthy in neighborhoods that are impoverished. And that this is actually going to be more helpful than focusing on body size. Thank you.
That was fabulous. Thank you very much for raising and making more complex the issues that we're talking about. That was fabulous. So now I'd like to introduce Adrienne Ressler. She is the Vice President for Professional Development for the Renfrew Center Foundation and has served as senior staff for 24 years. Ressler attended the University of Michigan, where she served as faculty in the School of Education. A body image specialist, she is a member of the Academy of Eating Disorders, as well as a fellow and past president of the Board of Directors of the International Association of Eating Disorder Professionals. Her trainings reflect her background in body-focused methods to treat eating disorders, body image, trauma, and substance abuse. Author of chapters on the use of experiential and creative therapies for eating disorders in 2 textbooks, her work has also been included in the first Encyclopedia of Body Image and Human Appearance.
Oops. Yeah, I think that's fine. Can everybody hear me all right? So I'm going to be talking about a history of fat, fashion, and fantasies. And amazingly, there are 3 of my slides that you have already seen from the first presenter. We're history majors together. Let me say that some of the beliefs and some of the things you're going to see and what we are dealing with today couldn't really exist if we weren't also sold a fantasy about what those things are going to do for us. That's how we buy in to what the culture is telling us, particularly women. And I'm going to start this section with a stanza from a poem, Walking Words by Eduardo Galeano. The church says that the body is a sin. Science says the body is a machine. Advertising says the body is a business. But the body says, I am a fiesta. But we know that the body is not a fiesta for the thousands who suffer from eating disorders, who suffer from body image dissatisfaction and disordered eating, and struggle daily every time they look in the mirror. Now, babies are born all different heights, weights, hairless, all different dimensions, colors, races, but there is absolutely no evidence that the 9.5-pound baby that you see here is looking at the babies around her and saying, oh my God, my thighs are so chubby. These are things that we learn. These are not ingrained. What is ingrained in babies is an absolute sense of self, and even very, very young, in an ability to distinguish who I am from the people around me. So body image develops very, very, very early in life. One of the ways it develops is through touch and parental responding to an infant's needs. So there's touch and there's gaze. This is called mutual gaze transaction, when you're really resonating with someone, and that's an important part of childhood, and it's an important part of falling in love or having somebody that you have an intimate conversation with. Your brains are resonating together. So how did we get to the place we are these days? How did we, as young children, learn to be female? From messages from our families, how our religion looks upon it, our culture, our peers. What are the things we learn as we're growing up? I look at this picture and I wonder how long it will be before these little girls start to feel really uncomfortable in their bathing suits. It's interesting, I work with eating disorder patients and disordered eating, anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating disorder. Individuals who suffer from eating disorders, 86% of them who were interviewed, just in general, a very large study, determined that their thoughts and their eating disorder symptomatology started before age 20. And of that group, 10% of that group reported before age 10. That's early dieting, the drive for thinness, and body dissatisfaction. So how did we get from this to this, where substance doesn't seem to matter? What matters is an insatiable hunger for attention and for creating an image. These hungers that we have are insatiable. For many, the high is never high enough, the scale is never low enough, and the image in the mirror is never good enough. How did we get to the place where we fear eating and we fear food and we don't take note of what the real hunger is about? Body image has a lot to do with how we perceive ourselves and living in our own bodies. But many of us who look in the mirror don't feel happy about what is reflected back. How many of us look in a mirror and say, "Hey, gorgeous. Hey, sweetheart, we're going to knock 'em dead today"? No, we narrow our eyes and we look for cellulite, wrinkles, whatever it is. This is the other painting was by Picasso. This is by René Magritte. It was painted in the 20s, and it's called The False Image. We live in a society that really has lost perspective. How we see the world, and those of us who are troubled by our size, our weight, our looks, our color, whatever it is, have lost perspective. These are the three graces. In the 17th century, this was the beauty standard. These women are not whispering directions on how to get to the nearest gym, okay? There was never any talk of body dissatisfaction. Again, from the movie Gone with the Wind, we really didn't plan this. Scarlett O'Hara is being stuffed into a whalebone corset. At that time, as today, beauty knows no limits of what women will go through to be beautiful. Many women at that time had their lower two ribs removed. They starved themselves in order to have a 16 to 18-inch waist. And some of the things, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, some of the things that women did, some of the contraptions that were foisted upon them. This is called the obesity belt to remind us to hold our bellies in. Obesity belt delivered zaps of electricity to your belly to make sure that you were aware of holding your stomach in. Roll your wrinkles away. It's a wonder no one got electrocuted, or at least we never heard about it. And this happens to be my personal favorite, the Princess Bust Developer and Bust Cream, or food. You can rub it on your chest, or you can eat it. So it's, and don't even ask me what the plunger is for. You can use your imagination. Here's an early gym, very, very similar to what we see today. And again, Lillian Russell, this was in the early 1900s. She probably didn't have a 16 to an 18-inch waist. One of the things we have to look at is not only decade to decade do the constraints of how women are supposed to look, but there's also a sense of what the hottest body part is, and things often change fashion-wise from year to year. In the 1860s with the Civil War, the hottest body part was the waist. Now, again, I don't think Lillian Russell had a 16-inch waist. In 1921, the first Miss America contest pageant was held, and Lucky Strike was the sponsor, and dieting was starting. Reach for a cigarette instead of a sweet. And one thing we know now is that the biggest percentage of new smokers are teenage girls who start smoking to curb their appetites. And also laxatives were starting to be used. The flappers came along, and the 19th Amendment gave women the vote, thank God, and the flappers, moving more into a man's world and having more of a presence in order to blend in, bobbed their hair, shortened their skirts, and flattened their breasts. The hottest body part was the knees. Have some nice knees. The 30s brought us the Great Depression, but also transparent clothing. A lot of women, if you look at movies from the 30s, are very glamorous and very sheer clothing. The 40s with World War II, limited fashion, and women were wearing men's overalls. But it's interesting, fighter pilots were being given amphetamines to keep them up on all these bombing missions, and they were later given to women to keep them up and burn calories. There was a juxtaposition in the 40s. The Rosie the Riveter, we can do it overall girls working in the factories, and the first pinup, Betty Grable, hot in her bathing suit. The 50s, the war was over, and the expectations were to move to suburbia where mom was a mom. She was a wife and a mom. Her goal was to keep her husband happy. The 50s also shifted the focus from body part from weight to breasts. Women were supposed to have large breasts and small brains. You can see that a lot of weight loss drugs were coming onto the market, and the push was on for women being thinner. Where did women go? Straight to the scale. Scales were very popular. Scales weren't invented till the early 20s. People actually went and weighed themselves on loading docks. So all kinds of crazy diets came on board during that time. And body envy increased among women. Here you see, I think it's Gina Lollobrigida and Jane Mansfield. Never give up. Barbie came on board and became the iconic look that little girls love to play with, despite the fact that she spent her lifetime on her tiptoes. Gloria Steinem and Dorothy Pittman Hughes were the wave of feminism, the second wave of feminism in the 60s. And you'll see this throughout history. As women got a voice, a bigger voice, and a bigger presence, the pressure was on for women to take up less space. And the push was really on to have smaller bodies. Now there's two slides here that give Twiggy different heights and weights, but in any event, she was relatively emaciated looking. She was a top model in Carnaby Street and was naturally extremely thin and was sought after because beautiful clothes hung on her like they would hang on a hanger. The bikini came into vogue, and the hottest body part was the belly button. Jane Fonda had a tremendous effect on fashion and weight with her exercise programs, and she headed up a $670 million fitness industry. She was also bulimic. The hottest body part was abs, women trying to get a six-pack very much like men. Women went straight for the refrigerator, but there was nothing there but a can of Metrocal or the latest diet product. You can see she's standing on the scale. And fad diets took over. Every crazy diet in the world. Eric Sevareid said the biggest big business in America isn't steel, automobiles, or television. It's the manufacture, refinement, and distribution of anxiety. And I love that quote because it's exactly what goes on. We feel anxious because we aren't good enough, thin enough, productive enough, perfect enough. And perfection comes in a lot. Magazines for women basically carry these messages. Women headed for closet eating. Wasn't a good idea to be seen eating or stuffing yourself in public. The 80s brought us Princess Diana and Prince Charles, and every little girl wanted to be a fairy tale princess. And at this time, the hottest body part was actually the thighs. And if anybody remembers Suzanne Summers and her 24-hour-a-day thigh master. Princess Diana was bulimic, and it led to, we found that out a lot later, but one of the things that the 80s brought us was a defining moment with the death of Karen Carpenter, the wonderful singer who died from the ravages and after effects of anorexia at 32 years old. It was a wake-up call, but not a good enough wake-up call, because eating disorders, body dissatisfaction among women are more and more prevalent. Just to close with a couple things I want to mention. In the 70s, Farrah Fawcett and her hair set another standard for the hottest body part was hair. In 80s, the supermodels came along, and also with Jane Fonda, not only did you have to be thin, but you had to be toned. You just couldn't be thin. And in the 90s, the hottest body part was the butt. So you were working out your butt. And what we see now, and I don't have enough time to go into it, but is so much digital retouching that is apparently fooling millions of people because they buy into the fact that everybody really looks like digital retouching has made them look. The complexity of eating disorders is much below the surface, much like an iceberg. It's not just the symptomatology, it's the anxiety, the depression, the drive for thinness, the drive for perfection. Some of that is inherited, and we can't blame the culture entirely, but the culture is not an easy culture to navigate when you're not perfect, and nobody is. Just briefly, what body image is, it's very, very complex. But basically, it's how you see yourself in your mind's eye, how you believe others see you, and something that's often left out, how do you feel living in your own body? And it's really an identity. I am gross, I am disgusting, is what a lot of people have, not just how they think, but it's who I am. That's who I am. And it really saddens me that that's what we're seeing in our culture and very much among young children. I have a 1.5-minute video I'm going to show. It was kind of hard to pare down the history of all of this to a short session. But there is a conference called the, I have to think of what it is. What do you call it when a species is disappearing? Endangered species, thank you. The Endangered Species Conference that happens every other year. Some of you may be aware of it. It's not about polar bears or moose or anything like that. It's about the female body. The female body is disappearing. And they had a contest about some curriculum or some something that could be submitted as a prevention endeavor. I put together with some of my colleagues at the Renfrew Center this little short video that really talks about perfectionism and the wonders of the world. Is this just going to start, or because it's not filling the whole screen? Yeah, this just takes 1 minute. Or if it doesn't work, I'm done. So I just want you to think about what you see and really be careful of your own negative body talk and how you treat others. It's not working? Okay, can we show it without the music, or it's just not working?
Well, you know what, we're kind of running late,
Okay.
so let's just,
Yeah, we can move on.
yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would now like to introduce Brenda Oelbaum. She's a Michigan-based multidisciplinary conceptual artist who for the past 10 years has focused on taking down the $66 billion diet industry. She does this by turning diet books into art that educates viewers about disordered eating and by bringing attention to an industry that thrives on personal failure by promoting low self-image and body loathing. Oelbaum is the current president of the Women's Caucus for Art, a national organization that supports women in the arts by creating community through art, education, and social activism. Welcome, Brenda.
Wow. I don't care what.
Are you okay with that?
Yeah, I'm fine. And where's my thingy? Great. Okay. All right, this is definitely not my usual place, but I'll try to be fast and succinct. This is me after 37 years of dieting. I have to say that since 2007, when this picture was taken, I have not fluctuated more than 10 pounds up and down. I don't weigh myself, except when I go to the doctor, and my clothes fits. You know, I don't have to do this dance, you know, oh, these pants don't fit. But, you know, I'm a big girl. And I think that 10 pounds up and down on me is not very much. Since 2005, when I started this project, I have 7,000 diet books. And yeah, that's me in a little fort I built. At that time, I had 6,000. That was at a gallery in Detroit in last February. Now, I'm just going to say that vanity was a big thing growing up. This is a picture of me with my grandmother in 62, and my grandmother actually asked the photographer to remove her wrinkles. So, I mean, this is way before Photoshop, but she had her picture airbrushed. You can see I'm a kind of chubby, healthy 1-year-old. And here I am in grade 1, and I was the tallest and probably weighed the most, and my mother did my hair funny. And I come from privilege, and we had a beautiful backyard with a swimming pool. And one day I came home from school at the age of 9, and they were doing a photo shoot for the local boutique in Toronto. And the photographer thought, oh, drag her down here, and she can look through the pool fence longingly at the model. And when I pulled this out, my husband was like, oh my God, that says it all. And I'm like, well, not really. I mean, it's sort of hard to see in this copy of the scan of the paper, but I'm not looking at the model, I'm looking at the photographer. I'm not interested. And this is in between age 9 and age 11 was the first time that I noticed that I was different. I started to notice girls that were more developed and who were attracting men's or boys' attention. And it started to bug me, how come I didn't look like them and what was wrong. And I had my first binge at age 10. It wasn't about that. It was a personal experience, traumatic in my life. And I was given, well, actually I fought with my brother for the opportunity to eat in an adult situation for 10 consecutive days. And my parents, of course, didn't want to eat with us. They wanted us to be in the kids' dining room. And we fought, so my parents would not get up for breakfast. And we ate without restriction for 10 days. And I actually gained 10 pounds in 10 days at the age of 10. But here you can see me at 11. I don't know what that 10 pounds looked like. I couldn't find pictures. I just know that I felt a little bit weird. But at age 11, I had my first in-class weigh-in. And I think it was for maybe skiing, you know, to get the right boots or the right skis. We were living in Switzerland. But I again discovered that I weighed more than any boy in the class. And I weighed more than every girl. I was actually 75 kilos, which is 165 pounds. And that's me at 165 pounds and 5 foot. So anyways, in high school, you know, now it's thigh gap. And when I was in high school, it was how much of your collarbone was showing. And this is me at the Golden Door, which was a very expensive spa that my grandmother took me to because God knows I needed to lose weight. I don't know that there's anything wrong with me there. But this was my whole life. And I remember telling these women that I was there so that I could get a date to the prom. This is normally what you think of when you think of a before and after. And this was my before and after. You know, I don't know why my mother was calling me Man Mountain Dean. I don't know why I was chronically on a diet, why my favorite foods were fruit salads. But I was seeing something at a very early age that made me obsess. And both end pictures are me at my maximum. Like, you know, it was time to die. And, you know, I couldn't go out in public, and this was just horrific. And the center picture is after my son was born, and I had managed to, you know, just peel off the weight really quickly. And I was being Rolfed because, you know, maybe if I stood better, I would, you know, be thinner. And like all people with anorexia, I got really into food. And I did an Oscar party in 2002. I was hand painting cookies. Anyways, the only art that I could do besides the cookies was think about how hungry I am. So I have files and files of images of hungry baby birds because that was really the only emotion I had. And as I went through therapy, this is a little bit more tentative, but I had started to collect the diet books. And so God forbid my mother say I have to show up at a wedding, I could break the glass and read the book because I thought that I looked like a circus freak. This is another piece that actually made me think of the keynote speaker, with the pants. This was sort of a dance that I would do every morning in my closet. And in this installation, I had jeans that went from size 0 to size 36. And, when I had stopped weighing myself, I had to judge myself in another way. So it would be which pants fit. If a size 4 fit, then I was going to have a good day. If a size 10 fit, so anyways, this is the I Stand piece was done in response to a whole group of fat activists who were taking action against the Georgia billboards, which were very humiliating and shameful, and body shaming and bullying, really, to fat children. And, I can tell you what some of them say. I've totally stopped looking at my thing. But basically, it was a warning, and it said stuff, it's hard to be a little girl when you're not. And, you're probably going to die earlier than your parents. And it was just really scary. And, anyways, these are just some local billboards that I saw because, I thought they were kind of frightening. Yeah, I'm going to breastfeed my child, not because it's healthy for my child, but because it's going to make me get my pre-pregnancy body back faster. And these are some pants that I wore during a performance, and they have all sorts of derogatory and euphemisms for fat. And I have 2 pair. These are some Venuses that you can see 4 of them in the show at the library, so please go and see them.
There's Jane Fonda with the little leggings, and the Last Chance diet. The Scarsdale diet has a gun, which you can't really see. And Stop the Insanity has the leggings. And the last one with the pubes is Richard Simmons. And here's a little detail. What I make with the covers of the books, because every aspect of the book is used, and every part of the work that I do is about dieting. I use flour and water as my paste, so it's the white flour, oh my God, don't eat that. And water, of course, is the best thing, and no waste. Yeah, I use the covers to make my little CoverGirl dolls, and that's about the size of the real Venus of Willendorf. There's a film that you can also see at the library where I consume an Atkins book, because dieting is pretty much as tasteless and boring as that. And last year, for No Diet Day, I put myself in the National Enquirer, asking people to send me their diet books. And I did get some, but mainly I got love letters from prison. So even at this size, I am a prison pinup. So this is a piece that's going to China. Well, it didn't make it to China. They thought there was something naughty in those books about China. Actually, they're very smart. That, or they're going to be very beautiful and slender customs officials when I get there. But this is the outside of the diet detour. And every book has one of these in it, which has, if you can see, the diet cycle. So diet, deprivation, hunger, craving, weakness, surrender, weight gain, guilt, back to diet again. And my hope is that I can gather enough books to build a huge maze like this that will be completely made of diet books that will be called Diet World. And you'll be able to go into the maze and follow and hear what's going on in people's heads about, whatever it is that is making them the way they are. And there'll be smells pumped in like Cinnabon at the mall. And anyway, so it's like a multi-dimensional installation that will hopefully teach people about disordered eating. And I just want to end on my favorite artist right now, who is Rachel Herrick, and she looks at obesity like from an anthropologist's viewpoint. Oops, press the wrong thing. And she has the obese in its natural habitat. And I just want to say that I love it because it's funny, and she's making fun of science. And even if you're worried that you're raising little obese at home, the knee-jerk reaction is to put them on a diet. Don't, okay? Because it doesn't work. And dieting is an eating disorder. And I've had them all, and this is the worst one. And the way I define dieting is listening to anybody but yourself about what to eat. Your body is a well-tuned, well-oiled machine, and you know what it needs. Your mother, when she tells you, don't eat that snack, we have dinner, in an hour, she doesn't know how you feel. So the way I deal with my children is that I ask them how they're feeling. Are you hungry? Because I totally lost control of knowing what my hunger and satiety was. And I think that's from dieting.
Thank you. That was really fabulous. Where is the exhibit?
It's at the Douglas Library.
Oh, I don't get out much, obviously. I got to get over there and send my students over there. Finally, I'd like to introduce Nancy Easton, the co-founder of wellness in the schools in New York City with the goal of inspiring healthy eating, environmental awareness, and fitness as a way of life for children in public schools. She has helped the foundation grow from 3 schools to over 60, serving approximately 30,000 students. She has been named a Food Revolution hero by acclaimed chef food activist Jamie Oliver, and Ann Cooper, the renegade lunch lady, recognized her as a lunchbox hero for her dedication to school lunch reform. Welcome.
All right, I'm cognizant of the time. And do they still have that thing on Sesame Street where one of these things is not like the other? I'm feeling a little bit like that, mostly because I have the privilege of working with very young people, cooking with them, eating with them, playing with them. And so they will grow up to be older, young in spirit, happy and healthy older people. So we don't address many of the issues that were addressed right before me, and that was a real education for me. So I'm going to talk about, because I'm cognizant of time, I'm going to kind of rush through, and well, I'll try not to rush, but I'm going to focus on a few pieces of pretty much why I started wellness in the schools and sort of where we are today. So I'm really talking about my program, not at all from an academic approach. So I'm an educator first, and I was working in a school in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and we're based in New York City, although we're now in 3 states in this country. And when I was doing my work, I, as a young school leader, was responsible for breakfast duty and lunch duty. It was kind of one of my important tasks. And I would stand in the cafeteria when children would come in. This is middle school children in high poverty communities. They would come in for breakfast with a bottle of soda and a bag of chips. And it was usually orange. And I actually have done a TED Talk, and this is in the talk, so you can ignore it, in the state. And that, the bottle, which when I was a child was probably this big, of orange soda, and the bag of chips that when I was a child was this big, and now is this big, right? So it's what's coming at us. So that was breakfast, that bag of chips and bottle of soda. And then later they had a lunch that was an overly processed school lunch, and that's really what we address at Wellness in the Schools, is the food that's served at lunch. It was what our great-grandmother wouldn't call food, something brown, something that was processed. That lunch was then followed by, at best, a chaotic recess with children bullying each other, and at worst, children, or both are pretty bad, a recess that was very sedentary. And so I watched, as a young school leader, children, what they were eating and the impact of how they were able to play, and I saw the impact of that on their ability to focus and learn. So I watched these same children not able to walk a flight of stairs to school, to the class, and these same children not able to focus in class. And at this time, it was in the mid-90s, there was not a lot of research around the childhood obesity epidemic. There was not a lot. It was certainly not in the headlines. But we were seeing it ourselves and weren't really understanding what was going on. And we talked a lot about reading, writing, and arithmetic, but we also talked about children not being able to focus. Now, I was working with middle school children. They probably were only thinking about sex, but they also were not able to focus. So anyway, that is why we started, and there's just some facts, and I'll go through these quickly. We were founded in 2005 to inspire healthy eating, environmental awareness, and fitness as a way of life. We work with departments of education, and we work with culinary schools. We're in 3 states, and we were part of Michelle Obama's task force in 2010, in designing the Chef's Move to School initiative. And this is a salad bar in one of the schools that we work in, and I'll tell you about those programs in a minute. And I intersperse my facts with some beautiful pictures. This is a thank you note from Michelle Obama. And we've been talking about these myths or facts all day, but we work from facts from our CDC that the childhood obesity epidemic has tripled in the last 30 years. 23 million youth, 1 out of every 3 are either obese or overweight. 1 in 3 children, and that's 1 in 2 minority children, will develop diabetes. So it's about health, it's about illness. And we spend a great deal of money on obesity-related illnesses. And unless something is done to reverse this trend, this will be the first generation of children not to outlive their parents, which is reversing a century of public health progress. So what does our program do? We start in the cafeteria, and it's really in the premise that schools in this country are meant to be examples. Examples of education, we're supposed to be reading. Examples of behavior, we're supposed to behave well. Why are they not examples of positive health? We don't see typical school lunch, and I'm going to show you a picture later, is an overly processed meal. It's a meal that we don't, again, our great-grandmothers did not call food. It's chicken fingers, mozzarella sticks, and French fries. It's, and, you know, if I think back to the 70s when I was raised, when people were cooking our food, and it did not look at all like what the food in the cafeteria. So we have developed programs. The Wits Cafe is in the cafeteria, and essentially we send culinary school graduates or chefs into schools to work alongside the school food workers, or what we call or what you hear called the school lunch ladies. We train the school lunch ladies on the implementation in New York City of what's called the alternative menu. So the Department of Education in New York City has developed a new menu for us, and we work in 50 of their schools. There are 1,200 schools, and the goal is that the alternative menu will become the norm in schools throughout New York City and in this country. We train the lunch ladies on the implementation of this menu. We bring salad bars to our schools. We bring water to our schools. And we provide what we think as a healthier lunch experience for children. And that lunch experience means a lot of things, and we've heard it talked about a lot today. We can't control everything. It's a short time of day. It's not always the most positive experience for children, and we're working very hard to make it a more positive experience. More importantly, or as importantly, to couple with that lunch, we have a series of educational programs. Probably what we have found over the years, the most important are the WITS Bits and the WITS Labs. Excuse all of our little corny acronyms. But the WITS Labs are essentially cooking classes, and we work in the science lab because all the children have science and in a course of a week. And we come into their classrooms 4 times a year for a seasonal tasting class. So those same chefs who are working in the cafeteria really become part of the fabric of their school. They become heroes, they do, for these kids. Again, we're in a happy place. They're cooking with children. They're cooking the same items that they see in the cafeteria. And those of you who work with children or cook with children or do anything with children know that if they cook something, they will eat it. So they're making these salads. They're making hummus, they're making vegetarian chili, they're making chili, they're making food, tomato sauce to go with their pasta, they're making food that they see in the cafeteria so that they'll want to eat it. So the educational component is a very important piece of what we do. WITS Bits are another educational piece showing it's not as hands-on, but they're more nutritional pieces versus cooking. I'm just going to keep going. We have a fitness program that goes hand in hand. Most public schools in New York and around this country, recess and lunch go hand in hand. So children will have, the premise is a healthy lunch and a positive recess experience, back to class, ready to focus and learn. So in the same way that we send chefs into the cafeteria, we send coaches onto the recess yard. These coaches serve as role models to get the least active kids active and to help prevent playground bullying. So again, recess becomes a happy time. That is our Coach for Kids program. We do family fitness nights with the coaches as well. And the last program is our Green for Kids program, which I won't get into at all, but mostly because we do partner with other organizations to do our Green program, because we philosophically do believe that a school must encompass all aspects of health, not just food, not just fitness, but environmental as well. And there's some great programs in New York City, particularly cafeteria culture, which has removed in September. There will no longer be styrofoam trays in the school cafeterias, not just for health reasons, but for our environment. So I'm going to wrap it up because I have very few minutes, but these are all my accolades to wellness in the schools. Our senator has thanked us for our work. This is just a sample menu and some sample recess activities that we do. Again, this is a slideshow that I share with schools when we're asked to come into the school. One of our cooks doing a demonstration with the kids, and soon the kids will be cutting those tomatoes themselves. This is the not so nice slide about school lunches before we came in, and a WITS lunch that our cooks made with the cafeteria workers. And this is a recess activity, and I'm going to skip over my tips. Oops, sorry. And I can end with that. So the last slide just says that it's a quote from a teacher in the South Bronx who, said sometimes someone plants a seed and others come along to water it. And really, that's one of my happiest slides because, oh God. Anyway, it's a really happy slide. Because I do hope the work that we're doing is planting seeds and watering those seeds so that children in this country will grow up to be happy and healthy and not have to deal with a lot of the issues that we were talking about today. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a terrific program. So we have about 5 minutes for questions. 5 to 10, no pressure. Come up. Can you come up to the microphone, please? So keep your questions, because we don't have a lot of time, keep your questions crisp.
I just
Short.
want to say, I think this panel is a really good beginning to what we need to do in medicine, just from a nursing standpoint. I think we have to stop looking at each individual component in medicine and look at it as a whole. The mind, the body, society's pressures on us to lose weight. And I would ask the panel, like, what do you think this is something where you can get together with all these opinions and put together, because we do know that obesity is a problem in the United States, but how do we come to where you're not putting pressure on a patient for a number? Because we all know that the same person at 175 can be healthier than the person at 160. It's how do we change medicine to encompass all these factors and show a person it's just not about the number? Because the thing I also see in medicine is professionals afraid to broach that topic. If someone is obese, to say we need to talk about this because your health is being affected, but not to say this is the number you should be at and you're not healthy if you're not at this number, when we know you could be at a higher weight and still be healthy. So how do you think we could represent that in medicine, a balanced program?
I can speak to that a little bit. I'm actually in the School of Public Health right now, and I work with social epidemiologists. And one of the things that we're trying to do is suggest that we really don't have to talk to people necessarily about their weight. At least this is my position. That we need to talk to people about their access to healthy foods and healthy behaviors. So that no matter what weight a person is, we can always encourage them to eat fruits and vegetables, we can encourage them to exercise, and that way we don't have to vilify or stigmatize someone based on their weight. So I think rather than considering a person's size, we can ask them about, do you have a grocery store in your neighborhood? And if you don't, then what kinds of resources can we provide for you? These are the kinds of ways I think that we in medicine or public health can start to address some of the illnesses that we commonly believe are associated with body size.
Yeah, I think one other thing is to really look at fat shaming in our culture and the effect that it has. I know there's a lot of movements for bullying, but fat shaming is a form of bullying. And when you hear people making jokes about fat people, you don't participate. You say, I don't find that funny, it's rude, it's not nice. Speak from your heart, not from, a point of criticism. So I think we can all contribute in that way to begin to change that culture of shaming, and individually to watch our own negative self-talk, because kids absorb it and they think that's the way you talk to yourself. And so those are just two things you can do very easily.
I mean, the only thing that you can know about me looking at my body is that I'm fat. I mean, yes, I am an apple. I'm probably going to drop dead right now. But the thing is that you don't know by looking at my outsides what my medical conditions are. All you know is that I'm fat and what your prejudices are. So I think that a meeting like this, where all these different sectors are coming together, are going to change medicine and make a difference, because there is a lot of fat phobia in the medical profession right now. I mean, they've bought in, the politicians have bought into this obesity epidemic, and there's still a lot of talk about it here. I mean,
you know, every other week there's a different thing. Oh, the obesity numbers in children are going down, and it's going up, and it's going down. But nobody's really offering an answer. And I think that if we deal with people on an individual basis and not based on this fat phobia, that will, you know, the reason why it's so expensive is because nobody considered it before. You know, there aren't big enough wheelchairs because they didn't make them. You know, I mean, these extra costs are extra because you know, they just made them smaller. I don't know. There have always been fat people. There will always be fat people, and they deserve, you know, human decency just like everybody, and skinny people too.
Nancy, did you want to add to that?
It's all right. I feel like we should go.
Excuse me, my name is Patty, and I was very inspired to hear the speakers talk a lot about how we can talk to our children, particularly positive reinforcement, and even asking them questions so we can learn and garner how to deal with these situations of body image and issues. And I was also very inspired by this progress you've made with this program where the 50 public schools actually are planting seeds to make the changes in these meal programs. I think it's great because we have something there to hook onto and grow from. I'm curious, too, how you will get from the 50 to the 1,200. That's going to be another major leap. And also, has Kristen Hillebrand been very supportive of this besides thanking you for the program? Is there a plan going forward?
I don't know if I can speak for her, but I spent a lot of my time fighting the New York City public school bureaucracy. I may seem gentle, but I'm not when I'm in that room. And yes, the goal is, as I said in this talk, that there are 1,200 buildings and that the alternative menu becomes the norm for the public schools, and in New York City as an example around this country. And there's other work being done across this country as well. But New York is the largest provider of food after the military in this country, so it's a good place to start. And yeah, I fight those, usually men, all the time to get better food in all the schools.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Okay, hi, I'm Karen Leibowitz. I'm a pediatric GI doctor. I just wanted to make a couple brief comments. First of all, thank you all. All the presentations were excellent and very inspiring. I wanted to comment on a lot of things that everyone else is saying in a sense. I have started a Healthy Me Pediatric Lifestyle Changes program that is a holistic approach that emphasizes not dieting. The first thing I say, this is not weight loss program. It's a lifestyle changes program. And it's about basically an overall approach in terms of using positive psychology and getting rid of that negative thinking that is so intertwined into this. And it's about focusing on health, not weight. And I've also done a grand rounds that says live for health, not for weight. And so it's just something that I truly strongly believe in, everything that you guys are saying. I think there is hope that in the medical world that there's a paradigm shift towards this, but obviously there's a lot of pediatricians, a lot of doctors who don't know how to approach it, how to sensitively say things and how to sensitively, and that's part of the problem. We're unfortunately not trained how to do that. And it's really, that's a negative thing. Like, we're not trained how to do nutrition. You know, I think more and more it's happening now. So unfortunately, things are going in the right direction, but obviously we're really slow and lacking. But there is hope. At least my program's here, and there's other programs too that are similar. So not exactly, but so thank you all.
Thank you. Do you want to respond?
I don't need to answer, but just since I now have the time, it's sort of saying something based from your question about doctors as well, to comment on yours, is what I was going to say when I didn't have any time was that a lot of medicine is very prescriptive. There's a pill for everything, right? We can get rid of all of this with this one little pill. And I don't see working with children sort of the preventative measures and lifestyle, again, versus diet. So thank you.
So I started by saying it's how morally laden our eating and bodies have become and how medicalized they've become, and raised that as a question. And what's very interesting is that we're closing the loop, talking about rethinking medical education about bodies and fat and eating and so on. So I think this is a call, to really rethink how we're training our docs to manage manage these issues on their own and with their patients. So thank you for a great panel. And Allison, you want to come up here?